There is a reason people doubt you more when you explain yourself more. You think you are creating clarity, but often you are revealing dependence. You explain the business. You explain the career move. You explain why this time is different. You explain why the old version of you is gone. And the more you talk, the more they hear one thing: he still needs us to believe him before he moves. That is the success signal you destroy by talking too much. Not because silence is magic, but because a man who keeps defending an unproven future teaches the room that the future still has no weight. Machiavelli would not call this communication. He would call it a loss of authority. And if you do not understand this, you will keep losing time, focus, status, emotional control, and self-trust to people who were never responsible for building your future. Sarah Blakely protected the early Spanx idea from casual opinion. She did not run around asking every friend, every relative, every doubtful voice, and every comfortable person to validate what they could not yet understand. Steve Jobs did not explain his way back into Apple. After he was pushed out, he built NXT until Apple needed what he had created. Different industries. Same law. Do not explain what has no evidence yet. Build the evidence first. Because the world does not respect ambition, because it is emotionally sincere. It begins to respect ambition when ambition becomes visible proof. So the real question is not whether your dream is valid. The real question is colder. Why does talking too much make a man look less powerful, even when he is telling the truth? And why does explanation without evidence often increase doubt instead of reducing it? This is not a small communication habit. It is a power leak. Every time you over-explain, you may lose time. You may lose focus. You may lose emotional control. You may lose status. You may lose self-trust. You may lose the element of surprise. And most of all, you may lose the only currency that changes perception: proof. You think you are defending your ambition, but often you are feeding the very doubt you are trying to destroy. Because the unsupported man usually makes one fatal mistake. He speaks as if his future already exists, but the room judges him by what exists now. His intention is private, his evidence is public. And when private intention tries to perform the work of public evidence, it sounds weak. This is how a man becomes trapped. Ambition creates pressure. Doubt appears, he explains. The explanation gives him temporary relief, but it creates no result. So doubt remains. Then he explains again, and the cycle repeats until his ambition becomes known more for being discussed than executed. If this is already hitting the part of you that knows you have talked more than you have built, stay with this. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and listen with discipline, because this is not about sounding mysterious. It is about becoming the kind of man whose proof speaks before his mouth has to. Niccolo Machiavelli was not writing comfort for fragile men. He was a Florentine official, diplomat, military organizer, and political observer who lived through unstable alliances, family rule, Republican collapse, foreign pressure, and brutal struggles for position. Machiavelli endures because he did not begin with what people claimed to value. He began with what people repeatedly did under pressure. In The Prince, he writes, "It appears to me more appropriate to follow up the real truth of the matter than the imagination of it." That sentence is the foundation of this entire lesson. Not motivation, not optimism, not the soft instruction to believe in yourself harder. The question is colder. What does your speech reveal about your position? When you explain too much, are you creating strategic clarity? Or are you showing the room that their approval still governs your movement? Because speech is not neutral. Speech signals rank. Speech signals confidence. Speech signals need. Speech signals whether you are moving from internal command or emotional dependence. A man who explains once may be communicating. A man who explains twice may be clarifying. But a man who keeps explaining, defending, adjusting, justifying, and restating is usually no longer transferring information. He is trying to control a reaction. He is trying to force belief. He is trying to close the gap between what he sees privately and what the world sees publicly. And that gap is where many ambitious men lose themselves. Privately, he believes he is capable. Publicly, there is little proof. Privately, he believes he is different. Publicly, he still looks replaceable. Privately, he sees the future. Publicly, others see his current results. That gap humiliates him. So he talks. He explains the plan because he wants his father to stop looking at him like he is unrealistic. He explains the business because he wants his friends to stop treating it like a phase. He explains the career move because he wants someone to confirm that he is not wasting his life. He explains why this time is different because deep down he knows they still remember every other time he said that. That is the wound. It is not only that they doubt you. It is that part of you still wants their doubt to end before you move. And the moment you need someone to believe your ambition, they gain power over it. That sentence must be understood clearly. It does not mean never speak. It does not mean never explain. It does not mean become cold, arrogant, or unreachable. It means never confuse explanation with authority. Speech should serve action. When speech replaces action, it becomes weakness. The dependent man says, "Let me explain so you understand." The strategic man says, "Let me build," so explanation becomes unnecessary. One asks for recognition, the other manufactures it. And this is where most men lie to themselves. They say they are explaining because people need context. Sometimes that is true, but often they are explaining because silence would force them to face the absence of proof. It is easier to talk about the business than to call 10 prospects. It is easier to explain the channel than to publish the first video. It is easier to describe the future body than to train when nobody is watching. It is easier to tell people you are changing than to build the quiet consistency that makes your old identity impossible to maintain. Talking gives you a soft version of the identity before you have earned the hard version. That is why it becomes addictive. The most dangerous thing about announcing your future is that it can make you feel as if you have already begun becoming it. A man says he is starting a business, and for a moment he feels like a founder. He says he is building a brand, and for a moment he feels like a creator. He says he is changing his body, and for a moment he feels like a disciplined man. He says he is done being weak, and for a moment he feels like the stronger version has already arrived. But the feeling arrives before the evidence. That is the trap. He receives the emotional reward early. He feels seen before he has earned visibility. He feels serious before he has survived difficulty. He feels respected before he has produced anything that demands respect. And once the emotional reward arrives early, execution becomes easier to postpone. Research by Peter Gollwitzer and colleagues found that identity-related intentions noticed by others were translated into action less intensely than intentions that were ignored. In simple terms, when people publicly recognize an intended identity, it can sometimes reduce the pressure to complete the behavior that would make the identity real. That is not motivation, that is a warning. Because many men are not failing from a lack of ambition. They are failing because they keep converting ambition into emotional stimulation instead of measurable output. They announce. They receive a reaction. If people praise them, they feel validated. If people doubt them, they feel challenged. Either way, the nervous system gets fed. Then they replay the conversation. They imagine proving everyone wrong. They imagine the future scene where the doubters finally understand. They imagine walking into the room as the man nobody can ignore. But imagination is not construction. No customer has been contacted. No finished work has been published. No offer has been tested. No portfolio has been built. No revenue has been created. No skill has been proven under pressure. Nothing has moved except emotion. This is why talking can keep a man broke. Not because speech itself destroys wealth, but because speech can become a substitute for output. And wealth follows output that creates value, not identity claims that create emotional relief. The second law is this: talking can make you feel like the man before you have paid the price to become him. That is why the question must change. Stop asking, do they understand what I am trying to become? Ask, what evidence did I create today that makes the future less theoretical? That question ends the illusion, because it takes you out of the social courtroom and places you back in reality. And reality does not care how powerful your explanation feels. Reality asks for contact. Contact with customers. Contact with the platform. Contact with the market. Contact with the skill. Contact with rejection. Contact with feedback. Contact with the place where your fantasy either becomes stronger or breaks. Most men avoid this contact because opinion is easier to manage than reality. You can argue with a person. You cannot argue with an empty bank account. You can explain yourself to a friend. You cannot explain yourself to a market that did not buy. You can defend your potential to your family. You cannot defend a channel that has no uploads, a skill that has no demonstration, a business that has no offer, or a plan that has no measurable action. That sounds harsh only to the part of you that still wants language to replace evidence. But to the strategic part of you, it is freedom. Because if the problem is evidence, then the solution is not begging for belief. The solution is building proof. Machiavelli understood one of the most uncomfortable laws of social reality. People judge what they can see. Your hidden potential has almost no public rank. You may know what you are capable of. The world does not. You may know your ambition is serious. The market does not. You may know your discipline is improving. Your reputation does not automatically update. In The Prince, Machiavelli writes, men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. He continues that everyone can see what you appear to be, but few come close enough to touch what you really are. This is brutal to accept because unsupported men often live with a painful gap between private identity and public evidence. Inside, they may feel different. Outside, they may still look ordinary. Inside, they may feel ambitious. Outside, they may still look inconsistent. Inside, they may know they are rebuilding. Outside, people still judge the older version because that is the version with the most evidence. This is where resentment begins. A man says, "They do not see me." Correct. They cannot see what you have not made visible. He says, "They underestimate me." Maybe. But sometimes the colder diagnosis is, you are still unproven. A weak man hears that as disrespect. A strategic man hears it as data. Because if you are unproven, the answer is not emotional defense. The answer is proof creation. Look at what people actually judge. Results, reputation, consistency, completed work, social proof, revenue, skill displayed under pressure, a visible pattern of kept promises. They do not reliably judge your intentions. They do not reliably judge your private hunger. They do not reliably judge your unseen sacrifice. They do not reliably judge your internal transformation. They do not reliably judge future plans that have not survived contact with difficulty. This does not mean people are always fair. They are not. This does not mean every critic is wise. Many are not. This does not mean your environment has the right to define your ceiling. It does not. But it does mean you must stop demanding public respect for private evidence. The world cannot directly inspect your inner life. It judges signals. So the answer is not fake appearance. The answer is visible substance. Do not rent status. Do not exaggerate. Do not pretend. Build a record. Build a body of work. Build a portfolio. Build a revenue trail. Build a skill demonstration. Build a transformation that leaves evidence. Because the old belief says, if I explain myself clearly enough, they will finally believe. The strategic belief says, if I create enough proof, belief becomes less relevant. That is the difference between a man trapped in approval and a man moving toward authority. The first man wants the room to update before the evidence changes. The second man changes the evidence until the room has no choice but to update, and this is where silence becomes misunderstood. Many men hear this and think the answer is to say nothing. They turn silence into an image. They become quiet not because they are building, but because they are hiding. That is not power. That is fear wearing a disciplined mask. Strategic silence is not the absence of speech. It is controlled exposure. It means you do not hand fragile work to people who are only qualified to mock it. It means you do not ask unqualified people to validate an early-stage ambition they cannot understand, measure, build, protect, or improve. It means you do not expose the seed to people qualified only to judge the fruit. Because an idea can die before reality tests it, not because the idea is weak, but because it was exposed too early to people who could not build it. A casual observer can mock the seed because he cannot imagine the tree. A useful advisor helps you test soil, cost, demand, protection, and execution. That distinction is everything. You do not need universal belief, you need useful resistance. You do not need everyone to understand. You need qualified feedback. You do not need applause. You need evidence. And once you understand that, the people who doubt you lose their central power over your movement, not because their opinions vanish, but because their opinions are no longer the foundation of your next action. This is where the unsupported man begins to change. He stops walking into every conversation as a defendant. He stops treating dinner tables like courtrooms. He stops explaining his ambition to people who only know how to measure life through safety, familiarity, and past evidence. He stops trying to make them feel the future before the future has been built. He still listens when criticism contains useful intelligence. He still asks questions when someone has expertise. He still learns. But he no longer confuses emotional approval with strategic guidance. He no longer asks, "Do you believe in me?" He asks, "What evidence would validate this? What is weak in the offer? What would make this fail? What result should I measure first?" That is the beginning of power, not domination over others, command over yourself. Because the man who needs every doubtful person to understand him is still being governed by the crowd. The man who chooses precise counsel, builds evidence, and lets proof accumulate is no longer waiting to be emotionally released. He has left the courtroom, he has entered the arena, and in the arena, explanation has a different role. You speak to clarify action. You speak to coordinate with useful people. You speak to sell what has substance. You speak to ask precise questions. You speak when speech serves movement. But you do not speak to beg the world to validate an identity reality has not confirmed. That is the discipline. And it is the discipline Sarah Blakely understood before Spanx became Spanx. She did not ask everyone to approve the idea while it was still fragile. She protected the seed. She researched. She patented. She named. She packaged. She pursued the product. She faced manufacturers. She faced rejection. She faced laughter. But she did not confuse casual doubt with reality's final verdict. She selected the right reality to test the idea against. That is the next level of this law. Silence alone does not create power. Selected exposure does. The question is not, should I tell people or stay silent? The real question is, who is qualified to strengthen this before it becomes visible proof? That question separates the man who is hiding from the man who is building. Sarah Blakely did not hide from reality. That is the point most men miss. She did not protect the idea because she was afraid of being challenged. She protected it from the wrong kind of challenge. There is a difference between useful resistance and emotional contamination. Useful resistance asks, can this be made? Can this be protected? Can this be packaged? Can this reach a buyer? Emotional contamination says, that sounds stupid. Who do you think you are? Nobody in this family does that. You tried something before, and it did not work. Be realistic. Those are not always insights. Sometimes they are fear wearing the costume of wisdom. Blakely understood that early-stage ambition is structurally fragile. Not emotionally fragile. Structurally fragile. There is not enough proof yet, not enough insulation, not enough momentum, not enough public evidence. So if you expose it too early to casual judgment, the idea has to survive a social trial before it has developed real strength. That is how many men destroy their own future before the market ever gets a vote. They talk too early. They explain too much. They let people who have never built anything become judges over something still being formed. Then, one doubtful face becomes a verdict. One sarcastic comment becomes a prophecy. One warning from a fearful person becomes a command. And now the man spends more energy recovering emotionally than building materially. This is why strategic silence matters. Not silence from fear, silence from protection. Machiavelli writes in The Art of War, men who want to do something ought first to prepare themselves with all industry. Preparation before display. That is the law. Do not display the fragile thing before you have prepared it to survive being seen. Do not bring the seed to people who only know how to judge fruit. Do not ask the comfortable to understand what requires risk. Do not ask the timid to bless what requires pressure. Do not ask the unproven to approve what requires proof. This does not make them enemies. It makes them unqualified for that stage of the process. That distinction matters. The weak man turns every doubtful person into a villain because he needs someone to blame for his hesitation. The strategic man asks a cleaner question. Is this person useful to the next move? If yes, listen. If no, limit exposure. Because your goal is not to win every emotional debate. Your goal is to build a position that no longer depends on debate. This is where Sarah Blakely becomes more than a business example. She becomes a law of power. She protected the idea while it was still a seed. She sought the kind of resistance that could turn it into a product. She did not need everyone to believe. She needed the next piece of evidence. A prototype, a manufacturer, a name, a package, a buyer, a sale. That is how proof is created, not through mass approval, through selected action. The dependent man asks, who believes in this? The strategic man asks, what preparation makes belief less necessary? That is the shift. But silence alone still is not enough. Some men stay silent and produce nothing. They call it privacy. They call it focus. They call it moving in silence. But the truth is simpler. They are afraid to be measured. Real strategic silence is not hiding from the test. It is choosing the right test. And once the right test appears, you move toward it. You publish, you contact, You sell, you apply, you build, you measure. You let reality answer what opinion cannot. That is where Steve Jobs becomes the harder example. Because Sarah Blakely protected a beginning. Jobs had to rebuild after public defeat. He was not merely criticized, he was removed from Apple, the company he helped create. That kind of rejection attacks a man at the root of his identity. When the thing you helped build no longer has a place for you, the temptation to explain becomes powerful. You want to tell the world what they failed to see. You want to defend your genius. You want to correct the story. You want to prove the gatekeepers wrong with words before proof has arrived. But public explanation after defeat often sounds like weakness unless it is backed by new power. The room does not care that you feel misunderstood. It cares what you can now produce. That is the cruelty and the usefulness of reality. Jobs did not recover position by demanding that Apple understand him. He started NXT. He also started Pixar during that same period and later described those years as one of the most creative periods of his life. Apple eventually bought NXT. The technology developed there became part of Apple's later revival. That is the difference between explanation and leverage. Explanation asks people to reconsider you. Leverage gives them a reason to reconsider you. A man with no proof says, "Please understand what I am capable of." A man with leverage says, "Here is what exists now because I acted without your permission." That sentence changes the room, because leverage moves the conversation from emotion to structure. When you have no evidence, you are asking people to believe. When you have proof, you are asking them to calculate. That is a different game. Belief is unstable. Calculation is colder. A person may not like you and still respect proof. A person may not understand you and still recognize leverage. A person may not support your ambition and still be forced to update his judgment when your evidence changes. That is why the unsupported man must stop trying to win sympathy from the gate and start building something the gate must account for. Jobs did not make Apple's belief the foundation of his next move. He built outside the system that removed him. That is the lesson. Do not beg for re-entry. Build something the gate must eventually respect. Machiavelli writes in The Prince, "Those only are reliable, certain, and durable that depend on yourself and your valor." The context is political security, not personal branding. But the structure is clear. Foundations that depend entirely on others are fragile. Foundations built through your own capacity are more durable. This does not mean refuse help. Jobs built companies through teams, capital, cooperation, talent, and timing. Blakely needed manufacturers, lawyers, buyers, packaging, and production. The point is not isolation. The point is authorship. Do not make someone else's belief the foundation of your movement. Use help strategically. Use counsel carefully. Use markets honestly. Use feedback intelligently. But do not hand your internal command to people whose approval rises and falls with their mood, fear, incentives, or memory of your past. Because after rejection, a man usually has two choices. He can explain, or he can build. If he explains after every rejection, he remains psychologically attached to the rejecting authority. He keeps returning to the place that denied him, hoping the judge will change his mind. But if he builds after rejection, he shifts the battlefield. He is no longer asking, "Why do you not see me?" He is forcing a new question. What does my evidence make possible now? That is power, not noise, not revenge fantasies, not fake dominance language. Power is change position. Power is reduced dependence. Power is proof that gives you alternatives. The man who explains after every rejection is still living under the authority of the rejecter. The man who builds after rejection begins to author the next terrain. That is why over-explaining is so dangerous. It keeps the rejected man emotionally near the people who rejected him. He keeps trying to make them understand. He keeps trying to make them admit they were wrong. He keeps using their doubt as fuel, but secretly he is still using their approval as the imagined finish line. That is not freedom. That is dependency with a harder voice. The real move is not to build your life around proving enemies wrong. That still gives them central placement in your psychology. The real move is to build so accurately, so visibly, and so consistently that their opinion becomes less operationally relevant. They may still doubt. They may still misunderstand. They may still remember the weaker version. But their belief no longer decides whether you act. That is the difference between emotional revenge and strategic independence. And to reach that point, you need one more discipline: control of counsel. Because if you keep handing your direction to every voice around you, your actions will never stabilize. Listening is not weakness, but accepting every opinion as authority is. This is one of the hidden reasons unsupported men remain stuck. They do not separate advice from command. Someone says, "That will not work." They treat it as prophecy. Someone says, "You are not ready." They treat it as law. Someone says, "Be realistic." They treat it as wisdom. But not every warning is intelligence. Some warnings are fear. Some are projection. Some are envy. Some are ordinary ignorance. Some are useful and should be examined. The strategic man must know the difference. If you do not control counsel, the most anxious person in your environment controls your future. The most risk-averse voice slows you down. The least qualified critic receives veto power. The person who knows your past becomes the judge of your future. And because their opinion affects your emotional state, you begin over-explaining again. You defend the plan, you adjust the language, you soften your ambition, you seek one more conversation, you wait until everyone feels comfortable. But everyone may never feel comfortable. And even if they do, comfort is not proof. Machiavelli writes in "The prince, a prince, ought always to take counsel, but only when he wishes and not when others wish." He continues that a ruler should be a constant inquirer and patient listener on the matters he has chosen to examine. The principle is not arrogance, the principle is governance. Do not let random voices define the debate. Ask precise questions from useful people. Do not ask, "Do you believe in me?" Ask, "What is weak in the offer? What cost am I underestimating? What evidence would validate this? What would make this fail? What result should I measure first?" The first kind of question asks for emotional approval. The second kind asks for strategic intelligence. That distinction will change your life if you apply it. Because most men do not actually want advice. They want reassurance disguised as advice. They want someone to say, "You can do this, you are special, they are wrong about you. Your time is coming." But reassurance does not build position. Useful counsel may hurt more because it tells you where the plan breaks. It may expose that your offer is unclear. It may reveal that your skill is average. It may show that your audience does not want what you thought they wanted. It may prove that your timeline is unrealistic. It may force you to become more disciplined, more specific, more patient, and more measured. That is why weak men reject useful counsel while chasing emotional validation. They say they want the truth, but they only want a better feeling. The strategic man does not ask the world to protect his self-image. He asks reality to make his plan sharper. Control the frame of advice. That is the principle. If you ask unqualified people to judge your identity, they will judge from their limitations. If you ask qualified people to test your plan, they may expose weaknesses that improve it. Silence protects immature proof. Counsel strengthens it. Execution validates it. That sequence must not be reversed. If you seek applause before execution, you become dependent. If you seek criticism from the wrong people before preparation, you become discouraged. If you seek counsel without choosing the frame, you become unstable. But if you protect the seed, test it with useful resistance, and create measurable proof, you begin to move differently. A weak man says, "Tell me if I can do this." A strategic man says, "Tell me where the plan breaks, then I will decide." One is seeking permission. The other is gathering intelligence. That is the deeper identity shift. You are not here to become a man who never listens. You are here to become a man who knows, who has earned the right to influence the next move. And once you understand that, the protocol becomes simple. You do not need a better explanation. You need one completed result. Start by identifying the gatekeeper. Ask yourself, who makes me feel like I must defend my ambition? It may be your father, your mother, your friends, your boss, an old rival, a person whose approval you claim not to need. It may even be an audience that barely knows you. Do not choose the loudest critic. Choose the person whose reaction changes your behavior. That is the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper is not always someone with real power over your path. Often, he only has emotional power because you gave it to him. He becomes the person you imagine before you act. You think about what he would say. You picture his reaction. You rehearse your defense. You delay the move until you can explain it better. That is how approval becomes authority. Then identify the delayed action. Ask, what have I postponed because I am still trying to be understood? Common answers are simple: publishing, selling, applying, training, building, leaving, starting, asking, negotiating, documenting. Your delayed action is the place where approval has become command. Do not make this abstract. Do not say, "I need to get my life together." That is fog. Name the action. The video you did not publish. The prospect you did not contact. The portfolio piece you did not finish. The application you did not submit. The offer you did not test. The prototype you did not build. The customer you did not interview. The first dollar you did not try to earn. The evidence ledger you did not start. That is where the truth is. Then stop explaining the future. Use one sentence: I understand your concern. I am going to test this through a measurable action. Then stop. No courtroom defense. No emotional trial. No desperate attempt to force belief. No extra paragraphs. No performance of certainty. No begging disguised as clarity. This sentence works because it does not ask them to approve. It tells them where judgment will move. Not to your feelings, to the test. That is the entire shift. Action first, words second, proof before performance. Then choose one 7-day proof action. The action must be specific, it must be measurable, it must be visible after completion, it must be finishable within 7 days, it must be independent of anyone's approval. Publish one finished video. Contact 10 qualified prospects. Complete one portfolio project. Build one prototype. Interview 10 potential customers. Submit 5 serious applications. Earn the first dollar from an offer. Create one documented result. Save a defined amount of money. Finish one case study. These are proof actions. Do not choose emotional slogans. Do not choose become confident. Start taking life seriously. Work harder. Build my future. Those are not proof actions. They are fog with masculine language. A proof action leaves evidence. It can be counted. It can be seen. It can be reviewed. It can fail. It can teach you something. That is why it is powerful. Most men avoid measurable action because measurable action can expose them. A vague promise protects the fantasy. A measurable action tests the man. And that is exactly why you need it. Because self-trust is not built by repeating affirmations. Self-trust is built when you make a small promise, complete it, record it, and repeat the pattern until your nervous system begins to believe your own command again. That is where the evidence ledger comes in. Record daily. What did I promise? What did I complete? What failed? What did reality reveal? What is the next move? This ledger is not decoration. It is a weapon against delusion. It stops you from confusing intensity with consistency. It stops you from confusing planning with movement. It stops you from confusing emotion with progress. It forces contact with reality. Machiavelli's Discourses says that men fighting in their own cause become more resolute than those serving another's ambition. The modern lesson is ownership. A man acts differently when the command is truly his. But ownership also removes excuses. If the direction is yours, the evidence must be yours. You cannot say you are unsupported and then use lack of support as permission to remain unproven. You cannot say nobody believes in you while refusing to build the proof that would make belief rational. You cannot say they only see the old version while creating no visible record of the new one. That is the hard edge of this philosophy. It does not comfort your wound. It gives your wound a job. The protocol destroys over-explaining because it replaces debate with contact. Contact with customers. Contact with the market. Contact with the platform. Contact with the skill. Contact with reality. The man who explains remains inside opinion. The man who tests enters reality. And reality is colder, but more useful. Reality may show that your idea is weak. Good. Now you can strengthen it. Reality may show that your skill is not ready. Good. Now you can train. Reality may show that nobody wants the offer. Good. Now you can adjust. Reality may show that you were more addicted to being seen as ambitious than to doing ambitious work. Good. Now the lie is dead. A man cannot become powerful while protecting every illusion that keeps him comfortable. That is why this lesson is not about silence. It is about proof. The signal is not mystery. The signal is controlled execution. A man who knows what he is building does not need every witness to approve the foundation. He chooses his counsel. He protects fragile work. He prepares before display. He lets early proof accumulate. He speaks when speech serves action. He stops defending identities that reality has not confirmed. This is appearance versus reality. Not fake appearance. Visible reality. This is preparation before opportunity. Not waiting for fortune to approve you. Preparing so, fortune finds you ready. This is self-command over approval. Not trying to become feared by family or friends, but refusing to let the desire to be liked, understood, or reassured decide your movement. This is reputation over moral performance, not abandoning ethics, but understanding that the world remembers patterns more than intentions. This is control of narrative, not deception. Attribution. Documentation. Evidence. This is strength before security. Because the unsupported man often does not receive safety first, he must build the capacity that later produces safety, and this is power before wealth. Because wealth is not the first prize. Wealth is often the byproduct of capability, leverage, distribution, reputation, and control over your own action. The broke man talks as if intention should be trusted. The The strategic man builds until trust becomes rational. Stop explaining an empire you have not built. Stop defending a future that has no evidence yet. Stop asking people to believe in the man you have not proven through action. Their doubt is not always oppression. Sometimes it is simply the market's current report. Read the report. Do not worship it. Change the evidence. The old version of you may still have more public proof than the future version you keep describing. So stop describing. Build the proof that forces reality to update. Identify whose doubt still controls you. Find the action you keep delaying. Choose one 7-day proof. Move. Then execute it without asking for permission. If you want deeper, unfiltered material that goes beyond what I can put into public videos, join the Patreon. It is for men who want sharper doctrine, private breakdowns, and direct strategic work without the public filter. And before you leave, do the audit in the comments. Write the one person you keep explaining yourself to and the one proof action you will complete in the next 7 days. Like this video if it gave you a colder way to see your behavior. Subscribe if you are done begging to be understood and ready to build evidence instead. Do not explain more. Build evidence.